Is on fire. Our guests are Reverend Sejefo Seko, pastor from the First Baptist Church in Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts. He was dispatched to Ferguson by the Fellowship of Reconciliation, went to high school here in St. Louis, his family in Ferguson. And Jelani Cobb is with us, Associate Professor of History and Director of the Africana Studies Institute at the University of Connecticut, also a contributor to the New Yorker magazine. Reverend Seko, let's begin with you. Describe the scene of the streets. In fact, when we're finished here, these protests aren't finished. You are headed to yet another protest right behind us. We are standing in front of the Clayton Courthouse, where the grand jury deliberated over the last month. The Clayton Courthouse is called the Justice Center.
Well, it seems the case that the name of this center is inappropriate given the high level of repression and undemocratic engagement by the prosecutor, the governor. These young people have been betrayed by every level of government. As West Florissant burnt last night, democracy was on fire, the Constitution shredded, and young people who have been backed into a corner, who have been abused by the police system for many years. As you mentioned earlier, I went to high school here. I remember being told by my mother and my sister not to go through Ferguson. I remember police sticking their hands in our underwear, accusing us of being drug dealers when we were just some preppy kids with Argyle socks attempting to go on dates. And the rage that we have seen today, last night, is a reflection of the kind of alienation and the few options that young people feel like they have to express their democratic rights at this moment.
I want to talk about what burned and what didn't. We were on South Florissant. In fact, I saw Jelani at South Florissant. Oh my, the riot police were lined up. There were armored vehicles there, automatic weapons. They were really taking on the protesters. But when we went to West Florissant, where the buildings are, the businesses, mainly black-run businesses, there were no National Guard in sight. When we were here months ago on West Florissant, you couldn't even make a turn there. They had completely sealed off the area. But last night, to our shock, we drove unimpeded right down West Florissant. People were breaking windows. They were setting the buildings on fire. This is Black Ferguson that was left by the National Guard. Is that right?
Yes, I was there for some 2 hours and witnessed firsthand the lack of response by the fire department, the casual nature, the way in which the police engaged. They eventually shot tear gas. But what we are seeing now is this was a primary example of the racial divide in Ferguson, in St. Louis, and the nation. Because this story has always been about Mike Brown and bigger than Mike Brown. Every other day in America, every other day, some black or brown child is subject to the arbitrary violence of the state with little to no recourse. That every other day in America, a mother is writing a funeral program that would perhaps be the elegy of the democracy.
Jelani, I saw you on South Florissant. That is where the Ferguson Police, the newly built Ferguson Police Department is. Describe the scene and what you saw there.
Well, initially, there was a crowd gathered out there. People were, silently hoping against hope that there would be an indictment, and there was none in the offing. People were there. They were hearing the long-winded and insulting statement that Prosecutor Bob McCulloch gave before announcing that there would be no indictment. And then you began to see tensions ratcheting up. But as that happened, there was kind of a noose structure that the police enacted. They were on the kind of north side of the street, and then in short order, you saw armored vehicles and a very significant number of police kind of marching in formation with weapons. Some had weapons drawn. There was tear gas canisters that began to be fired, and they had people hemmed in essence, on South Florissant. And as you said, on West Florissant, it was shocking to see the lack of police presence there. And so we heard earlier in the evening, we heard from Governor Jay Nixon, as well as last week on Friday at a press conference that Mayor Francis Slay of St. Louis gave, and they used the word restraint. They said that the police would be restrained in their response. And it seemed as if that somehow they had gotten the message, perhaps, that people wanted to be treated like human beings. And then we saw what restraint looked like last night. Restraint was a kind of nonchalant approach to what was happening on the black side of town, with a hyper-vigilant approach to what was happening on the white side of town.
Mr. King, this was, 3 weeks before he was assassinated. It was March 14th, 1968. He said, "It's not enough for me to stand before you tonight and condemn riots. It would be morally irresponsible for me to do that without, at the same time, condemning the contingent, intolerable conditions that exist in our society. These conditions are things that cause individuals to feel that they have no other alternative than to engage in violent rebellions to get attention. And I must say tonight that a riot is the language of the unheard." That's Dr. Martin Luther King, 3 weeks before he was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, April 4th, 1968. Reverend Sekou.
I mean, this is it is quite relevant to this moment, the reality that these young people face. We hear it all the time for 100 days, them saying that I'm ready to die because I don't have anything to live for. School systems has betrayed them. The president has betrayed them. Eric Holder has betrayed them. Governor Nixon has betrayed them. Chief Jackson has betrayed them. The electoral system has betrayed them. They have extremely limited options. School systems decrepit, no economic opportunity. And then on top of that, to see their brother, their son, laid in the street for 4.5 hours, and to have wound upon wound, that they are in a situation where that the destruction of property seems the only way that they can vent their rage, because they've been given no recourses. And so while the president calls for calm, but has not dispatched enough resources to hold Darren Wilson and a draconian police force accountable, we have simply betrayed them. It is a shame that the nation has engaged in such behavior among the most vulnerable young people.
Jelani Cobb of civil rights charges being brought against Darren Wilson. I mean, Eric Holder, the Attorney General, is retiring, leaving his position. But he did come to Ferguson. You know, yesterday, President Obama was in the White House, and he honored 18 people. Among them were 3 posthumously: James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Mickey Schwerner. The state did not bring charges against the men who killed these 3 civil rights workers in 1964. But then the federal government did.
Right, and so there's been this conversation around this. One of the things that happened here is that people will say, the narrative that we heard Mayor Giuliani say something along these lines, former Mayor Giuliani of New York said something along these lines, that people are rioting, that they have kind of no respect for democracy, that they have no respect for other people's lives, other people's property. And in fact, people have rioted, they rebelled last night precisely because of the opposite, because the traditional mechanisms of democracy have failed them. And so people did not riot immediately. There was some small-scale skirmishes, but largely people kind of withheld their anger in hopes that the actual system of legal recourse would grant them some relief in the situation with Michael Brown's death. That did not happen, and failing that, people began to enact, the plan of last resort. When Eric Holder came here in the summer, he counseled restraint. He counseled the people to give the legal system an opportunity to work. And last night was a refutation of that. Given all their patience, given all their hope, given all their idealism, despite what we've seen with Trayvon Martin, all these circumstances that we could outline, people still had faith that the legal system might give them a modicum of justice. And so it's difficult to say that there's a likelihood that there's going to be civil rights charges now. It'll be very difficult to prove that this was done kind of racially motivated, or that Mr. Brown was intentionally deprived of his civil rights. And so I'm not much more optimistic than the people who were out on West Florissant rioting that the legal system here will give any kind of recourse.
In 2010, grand juries, these federal cases, grand juries declined to return an indictment in 11 of 162,000 federal cases. Wow. Now, Reverend Sekou, this is the first night of protests, and I wanted to ask a question about the timing. There was a big discussion about whether the decision would be announced 48 hours later, 24 hours. In the end, they decided to announce it at night, late at night. Why? Did that contribute to what happened in the street?
I mean, it was clearly orchestrated in such a way that it created a context of provocation. That it was, during the summer, it had become evident that the later it got, the hotter it got in terms of people's relationship to the police, and so it seems that way. And then, but as we think about this reference to the civil rights movement, these young people have been in the street for over 100 days, a third of the way of the Montgomery bus boycott, with limited resources, limited access to the civil rights tradition, limited support from various institutions and infrastructure.